is a real challenge to follow Tim in this opening ceremony. The good news is that I was brought up in a village, so I haven't learned some of his four-letter words, so you're not going to get that. But also, the fact of the matter is that my talk is exactly about dreaming. And it is about dreaming how the world could look like if we didn't continue to imprison our minds. And so I decided that perhaps this very innocuous term called space could help us to think through how we approach our conversations this weekend. Because spaces and designs of built environments are expressions of social and political relationships and power. Beyond the aesthetics that we see in every building, including in this little town, lie very deep markers of who is included and who is excluded. Relationships with the ecosystems, including here, are nested, and they remind us of what one can read. When you enter a little town like this, you can read from what you see the nature and the quality of the relationships in the space. Human communities from ancient times have always expressed their values and what they care about in terms of their relationships and their ecosystems through the way they construct their built environments. Spaces in which human communities live reflect their value systems, who they believe they are, and also their security needs and their sense of duty, of stewardship to the environments in which they are. We are also reminded by numerous people, including Tim this evening, about how indigenous communities across the globe have had the wisdom to look at and learn from those environments that we can't see with the naked eye, which bear within them the ancestral knowledge systems that we need so much to get the wisdom, that when we combine that ancient knowledge with the knowledge systems of today, we can be a little wiser. I want to talk to you in the context of my own reality. I grew up in a village in the northern parts of South Africa in the Limpopo province. I come from a people who migrated from North Africa through West Africa and crossed Congo, Botswana, and landed in the place which I call home. We grew up in that environment in homesteads made of rondavels, thatch-roofed rondavels, where everything was made from nature around us. Mud bricks. The floors were mud which was smoothened and left to dry. And then they used cow dung because every family had a kraal which they smeared the floor in different patterns depending on their artistic prowess. And there was nothing alien that they brought into those environments. But they treated every material that they use with reverence so that you don't waste. We also grew up not only in that physical space, but also in the space of inclusion. Every extended family had rondavels connected by what we call lapa, which is an enclosure, which was a place of meetings, of ceremonies, of simply being. It was an idyllic space because every adult was your parent and you felt protected. And of course, you had more than enough adults making sure that you learn the right lessons and you don't do things which will harm you and the community. There was also, in the construction of built environments, a deliberate intention to have a seamless connection to agricultural fields where the food and the produce that was needed for survival was cultivated. And that was done in an environment where there was security of tenure within a communal property ownership system. My grandparents had animals, as did every other family in that village, where they were kept in kraals, and those kraals were a source of free fertilizer, which was much more organic and natural. But it wasn't for the fertilizer wasn't the main reason for the kraals, but it was to create the security and order in the community. And so my childhood experience, which remains my adult experience, reflects and affirm the need to pay attention to the wisdom of the ancients that is given from generation to generation. And given that I've traveled in so many other parts of the world, you can and you do find wherever indigenous people live in undisturbed, and it's all relative because there aren't many places that have not been disturbed, you find the same expression, the same reverence for interconnectedness and interdependence and reciprocal relationships. But in came Tim's people to my part of the world. And colonial conquest across the world has decimated those indigenous ecosystems that were treated with such reverence. The capture of indigenous lands and the extractive economic systems that they brought with has scarred so many landscapes across so many parts of the world. That's why people are depressed, because it is depressing to see. If you fly into Johannesburg, in my country, you see the mine dumps left by the people who are talking about zero emission. What about what they left behind there? But the most, in my view, scar left, particularly in my country, is the deliberate destruction of African family life and its customs through the imposition of the migrant labor system under the pretext that every one of those huts that I was talking about will from then henceforth bear a tax, because people didn't need cash. Money didn't have any meaning. People had exchanges of goods and services in ways that was perfectly well functioning. So in order to get the men out of the village, they had to impose this tax, because the money you could only get from outside of the village. The impact of taking men away from their families for 11 months of the year is devastating. We have in my country 60% of children today growing up without their biological father being there and functional and supportive. Now imagine what that does to children, and particularly the boys. Where is their mirror for them to develop into healthy males and have a healthy male identity? The worst thing is that when those men came back from those cities, they had been humiliated in ways that are indescribable. The migrant labor system was not just about getting the men there, but it was about completely humiliating them so that they can become extensions of the extractive system. No privacy, no respect, no dignity, dangerous work. So even when they were present for that 1 month, they were shells. They were no longer the supportive parents that they could be. And so there is a book which was published at the end of last year by a UCT psychoanalyst called Wobi Long. It's a penetrating book, and the title tells it all. Nation on the Couch, Inside South Africa's Mind. This book captures the horrendous multi-generational impact of the colonial legacy. And this is what it says. Human beings are first and foremost social beings. And when social formations compromise the dignity of marginalized groups as a matter of routine, the consequences are devastating, involving either self-hate or envious resentment. You cannot, sitting here, understand why a country like South Africa, with all its beauty and all its wealth, is such a massive failure almost 30 years after the end of apartheid. But if you were to stop and reflect on the emotional and mental and psychosocial scars of the dehumanization of colonial conquest, then you would understand. And Frantz Fanon was one of the authors that helped us as young Black students, puzzled by why a majority population like ours could be oppressed for so long by a minority. And he helped us understand that the thing that first happens is that they capture your mind, and then you are done. So Frantz Fanon, as you know, was a psychiatrist from Martinique. He says of colonial conquest, it is impossible to enslave men without making them inferior through and through. So the built environment of my country, after Tim's people left officially so many years ago, remains the same pattern, the same spatial distribution. When you fly into South Africa, you can see where the elites live and where the rest of the country lives. And the recently released report by Judge Zondo on state capture. Now, can you just imagine for a second how any straight thinking, normal human being who is elected to be the leader of a country after all the decades of struggle for freedom can then be an agent of foreign people, including the private sector, to come and capture the state and render it completely moribund. As I speak here, we've got stage 6 load shedding in South Africa because all the state-owned enterprises are being collapsed. And so what's the model? The model is When colonial rule established itself, it captured the states from the indigenous people, and everything was done for the benefit of the elites against the majority. And now we've got the African National Congress, which claims to be the leader of the people, doing exactly the same. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I'm saying to all of us in this room, mental slavery, once it sets itself up in you, is deadly. Unless there is a decision and an intention to free oneself from it, it condemns you. So here we are, that Prince Charles doesn't have to go back and reoccupy South Africa. The butlers of all of those people who have captured South Africa those many decades ago are the current post-apartheid government. And the same people who suffered are still suffering today. So, what does this tell us? What it tells us is that we, as a human community, have to stop and take note. It's not just South Africa that's in this mess. You fly over or into New York and you see Wall Street, and then you see the ghettos around, same thing. You fly into, it doesn't matter where it is. So we have a problem as a human community. And the insecurities that this exclusion of the majority by the minority generates becomes a vicious cycle. So the questions confronting us today are, one, how can we reimagine the design and material use of our built environments to create living spaces that affirm life in its interconnectedness and interdependence? Two, how do we promote conversations about how we might free ourselves from the mental slavery reflected in the global built environment landscape wherever we are, which are unsustainable? Third, what models are available to us? Tim has told us about one, to expand our imaginations of how to be human again by embracing our interconnectedness and interdependence and work together to promote nothing short of a human revolution. I want to end by sharing with you a development in my home continent called the Pan-African Heritage World Museum, which is a project initiated, created by a Ghanaian guy called Kojo Yanka, who is a communicator who was also a regional minister of the Ashanti area in Ghana. He decided that enough of complaining, let's just do something that will demonstrate that it's possible to restore not just the memories in the minds, but also to do it in terms of a new way of building in Africa. Because Africa, after all, is the cradle of humanity, but also the font of the first human civilization. So the Pan-African Heritage Museum is supported by individual governments in Africa, as well as the African Union, and it is being offered to the human community as a gift to reconnect us to our origins and to celebrate at the same time the power of technological knowledge systems that have been integrated in this venture. What is beautiful about it is that it is a project that has harnessed technology for good, for life. And so it went live digitally on the 5th of May this year. So you can go back to your room and Google, and you'll find it. The physical building is itself going to